Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news. Bert Kreischer was back in Pittsburgh. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette reminded him the last time he was there, he was doing shows to people in cars. Remember that? We used to park in parking lots and comedians would do stuff and would sit in our car. Weird times. But Bert says, you know what? I look back on it so fondly. It's so crazy. Kind of the way you look back at freshman year of high school when you're like, I was terrified. I feel like I didn't know anyone that first week. And all of a sudden making friends was awesome. I mean, it was a horrible time for our country, but it was really interesting because I got to live in the back of a tour bus and travel with my best friends around the country at a time when nothing was going on and no one was going outside. And we stayed at campgrounds that were completely empty. We hit golf balls out in Butler. It was a really interesting experience. That first show I did in North Carolina, I noticed the difference. I was like, shoot, this is quiet. Then the more I did it, the more I got accustomed with it being the new norm. Butler was a real gem because of the staged infield. Every car was like 5 to 10 feet above the car in front of it. So it was like playing a stadium. Everybody was on top of each other. It was a dream come true. It was one of the best shows we did without a doubt, the whole bleeping tour. Pittsburgh was one of the first places I ever could kind of draw where you could build a fan base, and usually it was radio that was cool to you and let you come in. I told the Machine story on WDVE very early in my career. The Gazette asked him about the change in venues now playing 16,000-seat arenas. Bert Kreischer said, I think the adaptation really is from clubs to theaters. That's the big adaptation you notice because clubs are right on your toenails. Everybody's right there. When you go to a theater the first time, you realize, I need to slow it down. I need to be more of an act. I can't do crowd work. I can't lean on crowd work if I get into a bind. I have to have a legit hour and 15 minutes worth of material to make sure I can fill an hour. That's really interesting, isn't it? Yes. Bert talked about having to do the Machine story every show. He said, the advice I got from every comic, every peer of mine was, you got to retire the story. You got to close it. Like Ron White had his tater salad story, which is probably one of the biggest stories in comedy, and he just retired it. He said, I'm not telling it anymore, and his fans rode with him. I'm very grateful. I'm hyper aware of what my life would have been had that story not changed my life because I was there. I got fired from the Travel Channel. My wife was redoing our house. She wanted me to get a vasectomy. I was done. I wasn't selling tickets before the story popped. And I remember wishing like, God, I wish I had one story that people identified with that would put me over. And I got it. You know what? Be careful what you wish for. And they still cheer for it. As long as they cheer for it, I'll tell it because I'm not some heady comic that needs to be anything more than you want me to be. As long as you let me do an hour's worth of new material so I can get ready for my next special, I'll tell whatever story you want to hear at the end. I'm very grateful that anyone comes to see me live. The trailer for Welcome to Chippendales starring Kumail Nanjiani. That's a sentence you wouldn't have thought I would have said 5 years ago, right? Well, the trailer is out. In Welcome to Chippendales, Kumail Nanjiani portrays the exotic dance group founders Soman Steve Bonjari. In the trailer, Bonjari gets offered a general manager position at the local store where he works and says, I'm afraid I cannot accept. This was my dream when I got here, but my goals have changed. I have changed. I'm going to start my own business, a strip club for women. The trailer details the rise of Chippendales based on true events. Welcome to Chippendales, Hulu, November 22nd. You'll watch. Big fancy press release. Comedy Central announces The Daily Show with Trevor Noah presents Jordan Klepper Fingers the Midterms. Not a fan of that title. America Unfollows Democracy. New special November 1st, 11:30 Eastern. In The Daily Show with Trevor Noah presents Jordan Klepper Fingers the Midterms. America Unfollows Democracy. Jordan Klepper follows and interviews the increasing number of GOP voters who reject the 2020 election results and consciously nominate people who threaten the election process, all in a quest to figure out if America is ghosting democracy. A week later, Jordan's new podcast, Jordan Klepper Fingers the Conspiracy, will launch. That's coming out November 9th. So, are they grooming him for the big chair? I suspect possibly, maybe. He's got to be in the conversation, right? Well, Variety reports Comedy Central is considering utilizing rotating hosts after the program returns from hiatus. The Daily Show will take a break after Trevor Noah's final show December 8th, and it'll be back January 17th as part of what the network is calling, quote, a reinvention. Two people familiar with the matter suggest Roy Wood Jr. or Jordan Klepper might be considered to succeed Trevor Noah. Roy Wood Jr. recently jumped to CAA for representation, suggesting he might need a new advocate to move his career to new levels. Gabe Iglesias held a special fan screening for the new special Gabriel Iglesias Stadium Fluffy. During the event, Gabe walked the Dodger blue carpet, gave out goodie bags, which included a Gabriel Iglesias Funko Pop, t-shirts, and more, they say. I want to know what the more is, Gabe said. I feel like the show is a celebration of the career and just everything that I've worked so hard for. Everybody that was there that night didn't leave as soon as the show was over. I stayed on stage and I kept talking and drinking and hanging out. Nobody wanted to leave. Gabe's publicist earned their money this week because Gabe got a big story in Variety. Gabe talked about developing material. I always give something a good opportunity. I think if something's funny, I'm pretty sure I'm going to make it work. Nothing is ever gone. It's just on the back burner. He admires comedians who push the envelope, citing Bill Burr and Dave Chappelle as examples, but he won't use his act as a political platform. That's not what my fans sign up for. It would be a disservice to all of a sudden change what I do and start being political, or start being like, this is how you got to be. From DBK News, the University of Maryland had their homecoming. At the homecoming, a comedy show. Headliner Colin Jost. His openers, SNL cast members Molly Kearney and Marcelo Hernandez. Good to see the SNL troupe all together. DBK News tells us Kearney entertained with jokes about coming out to their family as a non-binary and a lesbian, child nicknames, and their 12-pound birth weight. Hernandez followed with jokes about growing up in a Hispanic immigrant household, his transition from his hometown of Miami to attending college in Cleveland, and his impressions of people pretending to know Spanish. Colin Jost must have been briefed up. He did some University of Maryland-related material, so somebody must have gotten his ear. He played off the audience's responses to jokes about campus Wi-Fi, the Panera Bread delay in Stamp Student Union, Maryland's football loss to Purdue, and indecent exposure incidents on the campus. I know Bob Hope used to do that. When he would do the USO tours, he would ask the locals, what should I make fun of? And then, as somebody in the Army would be like, make fun of General Hayes. He has a bad heel and he can't run fast. And then Bob Hope would get up on stage and do General Hayes jokes. So good job out of Colin there, localizing the material. Now, in the article, a sophomore, I'm not going to name her because I'm not here to embarrass her, but her quote, "I kind of went in not knowing to expect, and I had a really good time." What did you think was going to happen? I've been pushing the show a little harder on YouTube. You get the audio version on YouTube, no real visual to it, but that has brought some new listeners in. Many ways to interact with the shows, and they're all in the show notes, but one thing you can do is join the Facebook group, which is Daily Comedy News Podcast Group, and that's open to everybody, of course. If you'd like to talk comedy with us, there are a few regulars on there, and I check it, at least once a day, so happy to interact with everybody. Daily Comedy News Podcast Group on Facebook. If you have Paramount Plus, raise your hand. Well, tonight, Inside Amy Schumer Season 5 makes its premiere. Not seeing much buzz on that one, which is surprising because there's usually a lot of buzz on Amy Schumer stuff. So we'll see if maybe there's some more things in the news tomorrow. Ed Helms has a new podcast. Now, I struggle with Ed Helms because of the character Andy Bernard on The Office, who was cool at first and by the end of the series insufferable, and that has poisoned my brain against Ed Helms, and that's unfair to Ed Helms because Ed Helms is not Andy Bernard, so I get it. I do have this subconscious reaction where I see his face and I'm like, oh. Anyway, he's got a new podcast out called SNAFU. On SNAFU, Ed Helms finds humor in history's most infamous moments. Season 1 talks about Able Archer 83, a NATO military exercise that could have sparked an actual nuclear war in 1983. During Able Archer, the U.S. military went to DEFCON 1. That's the highest alert. The Soviets were ready to greenlight their nuclear stockpile because they thought the U.S. was about to strike. So I listened to episode 1. I enjoyed it. I'm a podcaster by trade. My career has been radio. I think it's a little overproduced, as many podcasts these days are, where there's just too much sound and every sentence has to have a sound effect and we have to have guests chiming in every 2 seconds. There's a style that does very well in podcasting and a lot of people like that style. This is that style. Personally, I don't like the overproduced style. Neither here nor there. One thing that did ring my ears, a lot of cursing. Ed would drop F-bombs, and I'm like, you don't need to do that. Like, it doesn't make it funnier. Contextually, it doesn't really add anything. So I'm surprised they have him cursing as much as he does. But anyway, it's something different, and the story's kind of cool. Ed Helms' SNAFU podcast. Ophira Eisenberg also has a new podcast. Hers is called Parenting is a Joke. Ophira and her special guest, Jesse Klein, discuss whether you can digest chalk, why their kids won't eat a cherry tomato, motherhood, and the real hero's journey, and more. Upcoming guests include stand-up comedian Roy Wood Jr., possibly the next host of The Daily Show, Eugene Merman, who claims to be on something called Bob's Burgers. For the new listeners, 2 questions. Have you ever seen Bob's Burgers? The answer, of course, is no. Second question for the new listeners, have you ever met anyone who has seen Bob's Burgers? The answer is also no. Isn't that weird? Think about it. Speaking of Eugene Merman, who claims to be on Bob's Burgers, he is starting a record label. It's an indie comedy label celebrating all things alt comedy. Pretty Good Friends, PGF Records, plans releases from comedy greats including Maeve Higgins, John Glazer, Bobcat Goldthwait, and more. This being a press release, we have a statement from Eugene Merman who says, "One of the most exciting things about starting a comedy record label for fun with your friends is the array of confusing lawsuits happening around audio rights right now, but we're committed to endeavors that make little sense business-wise, but give us opportunities to hang out with friends and make stuff that makes us all laugh." Great quote. And that is your comedy news for today. You can follow this show for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, audio-only version on YouTube, wherever you get your shows. See you here tomorrow.